From claiming to facilitate the entry of aid into Gaza to saying Israel safeguards Palestinian civilians, here are some of the false claims Netanyahu made in his address to Congress.
The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has shamefully accused Israel of deliberately starving the people of Gaza. This is utter, complete nonsense. It's a complete fabrication. If there are Palestinians in Gaza who aren't getting enough food, it's not because Israel is blocking it, it's because Hamas is stealing it.
Israel has been accused of intentionally using starvation as a weapon of war in Gaza, and over 34 children have died as a result of malnutrition in Gaza as of late June. In March, the United Nations Hunger Monitoring System, the IPC, warned that Gaza was on the verge of famine.
So much for that lie, but here's another. The ICC prosecutor accuses Israel of deliberately targeting civilians. What in God's green earth is he talking about? The IDF just dropped millions of flyers, sent millions of text messages, made hundreds of thousands of phone calls to get Palestinian civilians out of harm's way.
Whilst Israeli forces regularly issue evacuation orders and sometimes distribute leaflets to warn Palestinians of their intention to attack an area, these measures do little to prevent civilian deaths.
The war in Gaza has one of the lowest ratios of combatants to non-combatants casualties in the history of urban warfare. And you want to know where it's lowest in Gaza? It's lowest in Rafa. In Rafa. Remember what so many people said? If Israel goes into Rafah, there'll be thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of civilians killed.
Back in May, Israel repeatedly targeted displaced people in tents in Rafah, killing over 50 people in Rafah in just 2 days. And in July, the Israeli army started bombing the eastern neighborhoods of Khan Yunis, minutes after issuing an evacuation order to a previously designated humanitarian area that sheltered 400,000 Palestinians. And contrary to Netanyahu's claim, a large percentage of Gaza's death toll are indeed Palestinian civilians, mostly women and children.
But at the same time, Hamas does everything in its power to put Palestinian civilians in harm's way. They fire rockets from schools, from hospitals, from mosques.
As for human shields, back in June, Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank tied a wounded Palestinian man to the hood of a military vehicle, appearing to use the man as a human shield. Israel using Palestinians as human shields is well documented by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and can be tracked back to 1987.
The vast majority of Americans have not fallen for this Hamas propaganda. They continue to support Israel. And I want to say thank you, America, and thank you, senators and House members who continue to support us, continue to support Israel, continue to support the truth, and see through the lies.
Actually, the vast majority of Americans don't. And back in his own country, there is even less support for Netanyahu amongst Israelis.
Because he came here as a very weak Israeli prime minister. 72% of Israelis, according to several polls, said that they want him to resign. More or less the same number says he wants early elections. His favorability is 30%. In all the polls, 32% on a good day.
80,000 of our citizens in northern Israel evacuated their homes, becoming effectively refugees in their own land. We are committed to returning them home. We prefer to achieve this diplomatically. But let me be clear. Israel will do whatever it must do to restore security to our northern border and return our people safely to their homes.
Whereas Israel's war on Gaza has displaced roughly 90% of Gaza's population, which is roughly 1.9 million people. And Israel has damaged or destroyed 70% of Gaza's homes.
Today, as Israel fights on the front line of civilization, I too appeal to America. Give us the tools faster, and we'll finish the job faster. My dear friends, the war in Gaza could end tomorrow if Hamas surrenders, disarms, and returns all the hostages.
It was in fact Israel that continuously hindered ceasefire negotiations, the most recent being back in June with an agreement that Hamas's leadership in Doha and other Palestinian factions agreed to.
We recently learned from the National Security Director, U.S. Director of National Intelligence, that Iran is funding and promoting anti-Israel protests in America. They want to disrupt America.
The lobby group AIPAC, which works on bolstering support for Israel in the US, plans to spend $100 million this year against congressional candidates, primarily Democrats, and members of Congress critical of Israel. And do these protesters outside Congress really look like they were paid for by Iran?
Because when we stand together, something very simple happens. We win, they lose. And my friends, I came to assure you today of one thing: we will win.
Actually, Israel is not winning the current war. After 9 months of war, Hamas still seems to not have been weakened. And Israel is conducting this war with a failed strategy, using disproportionate force and collective punishment on Palestinians in Gaza. Not to mention that Israel is now seen as a pariah in many countries, is on trial for genocide at the ICJ, has a Prime Minister who the chief prosecutor of the ICC is seeking an arrest warrant for, and that the ICJ has now said that Israel's occupation of Palestine is unlawful. But yes, if Netanyahu is keen to count victories in terms of how many Palestinians Israel has killed, or how many Palestinian homes they have destroyed, then he's comfortably ahead.